Hey, everybody. My name is Winter. Welcome to our third out of four-part series of How to Win the Talent Game with our expert, Mike O'Neill. Thanks for joining us again today. We also have with us Ken, our co-host. So I will go ahead and share my screen. We'll get started right on time. Here we go. So we are on part 3 out of 4 of How to Win the Talent Game, practical tips for attraction, hiring, and retention, and a changing landscape for owners and CEOs. We are on change leadership, effective strategies for CEOs and business owners today. So we're kind of taking a little deviation from a little bit of the stuff we've been talking about before with the human capital and how to retain and hire in the multi-generational workplace. If you need any of the previous sessions, please email Winter at the Shift Spot, and I will be sure to get you a copy. This event is hosted by the Shift Spot. So who are we and what do we do? We are a CEO coaching and peer advisory community. We have found that there isn't any one coach that can get you on through the entire CEO journey. So we package them all in one place so that you can get access to these experts as you need, and experts like Mike that is here with us today. We love to say shift happens, we can help. And we like to have fun here at the Shift Spot. Here's a little bit about me. My claim to fame is my name is Winter. I have a sister named Summer, and I have a cousin named Autumn. And that is true. I had hippie parents. Ken is also with us today, and I like to think I've got a big resume until his comes along. His biggest accomplishment out of all of his accomplishments is his 3 amazing, beautiful daughters. And together we leveraged our 2 talents that Ken and I both had to help business owners find freedom in their business faster, because we find that sometimes business owners suffer silently, and they're expected to have all the answers themselves. So through going through all of the different parts of what makes a business run smoothly, we try to help business owners shift from working in the business to working on the business. And that's why we are doing this event this month. And we are on part 3, change leadership, effective strategies for CEOs and business owners. Today, this is going to be a little bit about what we're going to cover. And without further ado, I would love to introduce Mike O'Neill. He is our expert for this series. He's got 30 years experience in S&B and Fortune 500 companies, previously held senior HR roles with Shaw and Mohawk, the flooring companies. He's got an extensive resume, and is also the father of 3 sons and 3 grandsons. So we've got a lot of boys on your side, Mike. Why don't you take it over, tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself and what your superpower is.
Hey, well, I'm glad everybody's with us today. If I had to describe what my superpower is, I had someone recently say, Mike, you know what you are? You're a leadership strategist. And I kind of liked that. And the reason why that kind of fits is when people say, Mike, what do you do? I have found myself answering, it's not so much what I do, but it's the problem I solve. And that is, I have found, I don't know if this is your all's experience, is I see one of 2 problems. One, the company, they're losing employees they want to keep. And quite frankly, they're sometimes having trouble getting rid of the ones that they don't want to keep. And 2, the key leaders, they're stuck in the weeds. They're stuck in the weeds of the day-to-day, and they're losing sight of long-term strategy. So my focus primarily is with executive coaching and leadership training, specifically people skills training. I focus on helping leaders solve the people problems that have kind of kept them up at night.
That's what every leader is looking for, right? How do I solve this problem? So let's just dive right into it. Apparently, there needs to be change for these CEOs and business owners. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Well, of course, as we're stepping back and say, what could we and should we be talking about when we're talking about how do you win the talent game? The word change keeps coming up. And that is, if you own a business, if you're leading a business, you have to understand the need for change. And therein lies what I would like to just kind of start off. And that is, things are changing, and they're changing very, very fast. The landscape is changing, the market is changing, the technology is changing. Our customers are getting more and more demanding. But as a business leader, as a business owner, if you don't recognize that if you cannot anticipate and embrace change, your competition will, and they'll outperform you. And so what I hope people will kind of gain is a sense that if you own a business, it's your job to go champion that change. The studies are real clear, and that is organizations that are able to embrace and adapt are far more profitable. McKinsey found that those organizations that can embrace change and adapt successfully have nearly a 7-fold improvement in their profitability growth. And it starts with the CEOs. And what we have to be mindful of, if you own a business, if you're leading a business, I assume you know that you are responsible for driving change and the transformation that's got to take care of the organization. You have to be out front, and that's why we chose. Yeah.
So why is it so hard for change? Like, why do we get stuck in our ways? Why don't companies change? What's holding them back from that?
I think in short, companies don't change because people don't want to change. It's human nature. Yeah. And therefore we have to fight that human nature. I don't mean that in a negative sense, but there's just a natural tendency to leave things as is. And I think we all know if you leave it as is, you get left behind. So I think in short, why is it so hard? Change is hard. And as a leader, you have to recognize that and realize there is going to be work if you want to implement change. And the work starts with you. You got to roll up your sleeves. And that's kind of what today's sessions is all about.
I also feel that, often the business owner, CEO, they're involved in everything. They have their hands in everything. So you hear that saying a lot. I'm running around with my hair on fire, and you're working in the business instead of on the business. And I think that CEOs and business owners have really gotten away from becoming the visionary and levitating above the business and having a 360-degree view instead of having to put out this fire, then this fire, then this fire. Then by the time it's the end of the week, they're just twapped. And, then they go and do it all over again. And so what do business owners need to do when it comes to vision and becoming a visionary and sharing that with their staff?
I mentioned a few minutes ago, Winter, that's something I see time and time again. It's not unusual that business owners, CEOs, find themselves kind of mired in that day to day. And if you stay there, you're not going to be able to achieve what you want to achieve as a leader, and your organization is not going to rise to the occasion. So it starts with you as a leader. You basically have to be thinking forward, and you really need to be able to cast a vision, not just a vision, but a compelling vision, something that's very clear, that communicates what is it we got to change, and we got to make sure we communicate that in a compelling way. Another thing what I'm also finding is that when you announce a change, people kind of go, why am I doing that? They don't really understand how that fits into the broader picture. So my encouragement is that if you are implementing a change and you're trying to create a compelling vision, you've got to connect dots sometimes for your leadership team and the employees. You need to be able to help them understand how this change is going to have impact on the day-to-day strategy, and it's going to help the company achieve the goals.
Gotcha. So it says here that Harvard Business Review said that organizations with a clear and compelling vision are 4 times more likely to achieve their goals. Can you speak more about the specifics of that?
Yeah, let me attempt to. And that is that studies show that when you do it right, it has payoff. But the question is, what are clear and compelling visions? I think it's really in the eye of the beholder. It may be very clear to you as a business owner or as a CEO, but is it clear to your leadership team? Can they help convey that vision to those that they manage? The communication of the vision, what is you trying to change, is so important. But if you get it right, it pays off in spades.
So that kind of goes back to last week's session in terms of talking about the multi-generational workplace. If you could create your vision and speak to your leadership team and or employees in the way that they hear it, then your vision might get a lot more traction than just coming up and saying, here's my business vision, everybody, listen. If you were to break it down in ways that people really could absorb it, you might get more buy-in. And don't you think, like how this could tie into what we talked about last week?
No question, Winter. And it goes back to something, Ken, you mentioned before, and that is you got to step back and you ask yourself, as the leader of this organization, where am I supposed to be spending my time? where am I supposed to be spending my energy? I think you could speak better to the proper EOS terms, but the person in that top role, that is really their role, is
Right.
to stay ahead of and help be real clear on where it is you're trying to lead the organization. I might ask you, Ken, can you elaborate a little bit about that visionary role for the person at the top?
Yeah, I mean, just to hit a couple of points. I mean, first of all, they should drive the culture, drive the overall strategy, drive the be leaning forward rather than digging down into the bowels of the organization, fixing things and everything. But one important thing tied to the vision is it's very important that all the folks in the organization understand their individual role and how they attach to that vision as well. And I think oftentimes we don't do that, right? We articulate a vision, it's one and done and go forward. And we assume because we talk about it, everybody's good. But every salesperson needs to understand how they play into it. A support person, the receptionist, your admin, your IT department, every single individual actually should be attached and see the how they're attached to the outcome and the results at the end.
Ken, I appreciate you elaborating.
That ties directly into what you're about to go over as far as communicating and engaging, right?
We were talking about the vision, and that speaks to the overall vision of the organization. Specifically, what we're talking about today is how do you convey a vision for the change that needs to be made, in all likelihood, needed change. And if you can communicate a clear vision and a clear, this is why we are making these changes, and the communication is consistent to the point you just made. All too often, we kind of say, we told them once, shouldn't that be enough? And when we're talking about change, if you want to make a lasting change in an organization, you really need to be very, very intentional on how you're communicating and the number of times that you're communicating. You're reinforcing it in a variety of ways.
Right.
We're talking about how do you implement change. And I think part of the thing too is you really want to be as open as you possibly can when you need to implement change. Clearly to say I'm a bit biased, but needed change can be implemented, but why wouldn't you involve the people who are going to be most impacted by that change? So my encouragement to those who are listening in or watching this is be mindful that you've got to be clear, you got to communicate consistently, you need to be as transparent as what's going on. And what I mean by that is not all change is going to be embraced well. Even if it's good for the company, you need to be mindful of that. You need to anticipate some of the resistance that's going to occur. And when employee concerns arise, be willing to address it. Don't try to sweep those issues aside. The studies really show it. I tend to put a lot of value in what do the experts say, and what they have found is if you really implement change right and it's effectively communicated, you're going to see it in ways that really hit the bottom line. Towers Watson found is that when you have very effective communication, particularly communication about upcoming change, you've got a 50% more likelihood that you're going to lower your voluntary turnover rate. Yeah. Now, that's huge, absolutely huge. So you can't minimize that change properly communicated can work both ways. If you don't communicate well, it's going to backfire on you. If it is communicated well, you're going to see that not only is the change implemented, but the employees feel, they listened to me. I understand what's going on. I supported it. They value me. Why would I need to leave this organization?
And so I'm going to, you go ahead, Ken. I was actually going to set you up for something here.
It's also important to, remind those listening, specifically CEOs, that too much change is bad as well, right? So oftentimes, I think a lot of leaders implement change without understanding the impacts, right? And some very minor things, such as changing your office space around, really does impact employees, right? Rolling out new ways to input data within a CRM package, not just rolling out the CRM, is a change cycle. And I've always been told it takes 6 to 9 months to absorb change fully. And most humans can only deal with 2 to 3 major changes in at a time, right? So I think it's really important that CEOs and owners understand this and focus on what the major changes should be in the organization, what's going to have major impact, and try to not make it a daily or a weekly thing, which I tend to see more so than the latter.
And I want to kind of throw in something here. So what happens when you've got an employee, and Ken, this is probably directed towards you, like you've got an employee who is loved by everybody in the organization. They feel like a little bit like it's, their turf. Change comes, and this often comes with consultants coming in or something like what Mike and Ken do on a daily basis, and they don't like the change, and then they sort of become a little bit cancerous about it, right? And we call this cancerous employees. How do you handle when a well-loved employee doesn't want to make the change, and they go around talking about it to other employees, because that's a big thing that happens when change is needed?
I mean, first of all, it's up to their direct manager to control that, whomever that is, right? And and I'm not sure how to address this 100%, but if they've got to have the buy-in. So too often we roll out change and it's demanded, right? Or hey, we're doing this, and the why is not given. But you've got to make sure that you have buy-in and the individuals understand not just the benefit to the company, but the benefit to them as well. And there's always some benefit. We're not just poor leaders, right? We do implement, say, a new ERP that could be very painful and cause a lot of change across the organization, but we do it for a reason. And that reason could be because it's going to save us, a lot of, I don't know, we'll just call it time, which will allow us to free up some time to spend more money in investing in our employees for training and professional development. I'm just making this stuff up on the fly, but you've got to come up with some story, right? So oftentimes, salespeople will look at as CRM or new CRM being rolled out as control by management, right? Oh boy, they just want us to report more and do more, blah, blah, blah. Help them understand and work with the performers during that. Help them understand how this actually helps them make more money, right? Let me show you on how this is going to help put more money in, on your W-2 year over year by utilizing this system, and, make your life easier. And if you can do that, then people will, they'll absorb the change better. But you got to have that to that person you articulated, Winter. You got to have the conversation with them. You can't allow it, and they need to understand fully of how that positively impacts them.
So that ties right into Mike's point here about having them be an active participant in the change process. So I'll throw the same question to you, Mike. What would you do in that scenario if the employee didn't want to adapt to the change, and or how do you make them an active participant in the change process?
Well, let me start with the first question, and that is, it's not unusual that an employee, a long-term employee, a well-liked employee, they don't understand the change, and they actually take steps to almost sabotage the change. And when the person sabotaging the change is a well-liked employee, that can be a lesson for just a disaster. So the assumption here is there are people who might do that, and they may not necessarily be doing that intentionally, but that's what's happening. So you need to be savvy. You're running a business. You need to be mindful of, to the point that you made, Ken, is that when you are going to implement change, you really have to understand the ability for the organization to embrace the change. If you come at them too fast and furious, eyes are going to glass over, and they're not going to be able to do anything. They're going to be literally paralyzed. But if you're very strategic and you choose what change do we have to implement first, and you communicate that clearly and consistently, then the question is it just the top person? The answer is no. If you can, empower the organization to do that, involve them in the change process. You might make the decision that needs to be made, but why wouldn't you involve employees in the implementation of that change? And if they need tools to do that, whatever it might be, give them the tools.
Right.
It's not unusual, by the way, to the point I think you raised, Ken, is that oftentimes the ones that are most resistant to change are like the supervisors. They are the ones often who feel like they know last what's going to happen. The employees know, the key leaders know, but the supervisors feel. So do not overlook that as you're trying to figure that all out. So what might that be? Gartner found that if employees feel supported during a change process, they're going to think much more positively about what needs to be done. Literally, it's almost 4 times more likely to feel more positive about that change. There is an association out there for folks who focus on talent development, the Association for Talent Development. And when a company recognizes to change effectively, you really need to invest in the people from a learning standpoint. The numbers support it. Those organizations that have a strong learning culture, learn how to change, have a 92% more likelihood that the people are going to respond more positively to that change. So the numbers bear out.
Yeah. Great. All right. What's next? Change happened, got the employees on board, and then what do a lot of CEOs and business owners do? They backtrack on the change. They change again. They didn't, but so instead of doing that, what they really should be doing is leading by example and sticking on one course for a little while before making that change, right?
Yes, for those who are not looking at the graphic on here, the graphic is the leaders out front. They really, you the leader, you have to lead by example, and you need to be able to demonstrate your commitment to the change. You've thought it through, but they need to know that you have a sense of resolve to it. It's not being forced on, but you have to be willing not only to demonstrate a commitment, you really have to go out and effectively model that you too are willing to make the change necessary for this to actually work. If you're willing to get out in front of and model it, people pick up on it. It truly is much more what you do versus what you say. But we have to be mindful of change doesn't happen just in one fell swoop. And what I would like to point out is that you need to be mindful of, you want to recognize when people embrace change. You want to recognize teams when they embrace change. And that may sound a little bit touchy-feely, but it really goes back to just human nature. If individuals and teams recognize, this is what they want, and the boss recognize my contribution, our team's contribution, that's what they want, people pick up on that. So do not overlook the power of recognition and rewarding individuals. And I'm not talking about big stuff, just recognizing that it's not going to happen without their help. And when they do help, it gets recognized.
And so why do so many CEOs make change and then make a change really quick right after? It's almost like they don't have confidence in the change they made. And so, or they hear negative feedback and then they look a little wishy-washy, and it sort of, diminishes their position. Why does that happen so often?
Ken, I might let you weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, a lot of times, honestly, they don't give enough time for the change to take place and absorb, right? So change doesn't happen immediately, right? If I'll just go back to probably not the best example, but in the same example, if I implement a new ERP, right, and I have a business case to do that, right, that's not going to be immediate, right? Processes need to change, how we do things, processes, how our people are, go about their day to day. There's a lot of things going on. So just because I don't see the change immediately does not mean that we're not headed in the right direction. So oftentimes, I use the analogy with CEOs, it's like whack-a-mole, right? We try to solve things and we try to make this change, and we hit the problem and it goes down, and then we shuffle or shift and it pops up again. It's because, my opinion is a lot of times we're just not letting those changes to fully absorb. Now, keep in mind, if you do make the change, you do need to, there's an old saying that leaders should understand and have 80% of the facts before they commit, meaning don't have all of them and don't go through analysis paralysis. but you do also, it's a kind of a double-edged sword. You do need to recognize when you've made the wrong call, right? And it is time to make a shift. But I would challenge people to just, make sure that if you're committing to a change, with your organization, and you're confident of the outcomes and results that should be expected of that, make sure that you give it enough time to go through that change, and also be constantly refining and polishing up through that process also.
What I want to pick it back on what Ken just said, back to your question, and that is, why is there a tendency on CEOs' part perhaps to move very, very quickly? I kind of go back to the role of the owner, the role of the CEO. Your job is to stay steps ahead, but most likely you are already a strategist. That's just kind of probably how you're hardwired. That's why you're probably in the role you're in. So as a strategist, you see connections that others might not see. It's real obvious to you. And therefore, my challenge is, what may be obvious to you may not be obvious to your leadership team. It may not be obvious to the employees. And therefore, you just have to sometimes be willing to kind of put in the clutch, make sure that everybody understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, that you listen to the pushback, which is going to be inevitable. You're going to get resistance. And that's kind of the next topic that we're going to kind of bring up. If you don't get resistance, then you have to scratch your head, because it's just naturally going to take place. And if you're going to get resistance, you got to make sure that you are willing to hear it, address it, and overcome the resistance, because you've listened well and you responded to that. So sometimes what you got to do is provide extra support, extra encouragement for the resistance that's going to take place. And I go back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is, change usually is incremental. Don't overlook the steps towards the change goal that you're trying to do. Recognize when those things are actually met. The studies are pretty clear, and that is, if you are willing to share, a Harvard Business Review found that when you celebrate progress, which may sound like we don't have time to celebrate. I'm not talking about something huge, but when you celebrate progress, you're going to increase your employee motivation for that change significantly. They found it's actually 30% increase in the likelihood that you're going to hit your goals. So don't over or underestimate the importance of celebrating small wins. Small wins add up.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. So then we have to embed the change. We have to become the change we want to be, right?
Well, and I think that's what we tend to do. And that is, we think we've communicated the change has been made. We tend to say, all right, it's happened, and we moved on. And in organizations, when change is implemented, when they hit a hiccup, this is true individually and collectively. Personally, you try to make a change, something didn't happen according to the plan. What do? We go back to what we know. Even if what we know is not best for us, we revert to what we know. Organizations do the exact same thing. And therefore, what do you have to do? You got to step back and say, what processes have changed? What systems have changed? Do we need to change policies? You really need to kind of step back and say, have you built into the organization how you do business, the expectation of how we're going to be doing it going forward, and make sure you build means such that those processes are easy to implement and to do. You mentioned ERP, you mentioned CRM as two great examples. Those are good for the business, but most people don't want. Why? Because it requires more work.
Yeah.
And why they don't want it? They feel like Big Brother is going to intrude. And if you don't make it clear how this is going to be helpful to them, the second bullet we have listed here is that what you oftentimes need to do is you really need to be providing ongoing training and development to reinforce that change. It could be the systems that you're implementing. If you try to set it and forget it, it will forget you. It simply won't work. And I'll state the obvious, and that is when you put change in, before you mark it off the list, you've got to make sure that you're monitoring that on a recurring basis. Why? Because when you hit a hiccup down the road, they still will revert back. So don't take the fact that, we've had a good 2 months on it for granted. Monitor it long enough so that it sticks.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I can really see, like, this was not buildable content throughout this 4-week masterclass, but I can really see how all of the things we've talked about over the past couple of weeks kind of do line up into this really wonderful opportunity for business owners and CEOs to make a shift in what they're doing in their companies and do it better, right? That makes it easier for them in the long run. Anything you want to wrap up for our listeners before we go on?
I mean, one thing I'd add, and I don't know if it's evidently clear or not, but through the change cycles as well, make sure that you're regularly updating and communicating with the core leadership team, supervisors, core individuals, and employees as well, right? So that they understand what's going on, why it's going on, etc. Right? So it's not just, hey, we're going to change, here's why you should like it, and then 6 months later, hey, we did it, right? It is a process, a complete process with communication all along the way from A to Z. So,
if I might just kind of summarize what we just covered, and we went very, very fast, but if you're listening or watching this, you're running a business, you're owning a business, and really, we're talking about change. It starts with you recognizing that there's a need for a change. And as the leader, as the owner, it's your job to say and articulate what this change vision looks like in terms that people can understand and can relate to. That's really your job. If you can tie that need of change into what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, people can see this is not just out of the blue. This is part of what we're trying to do to grow as an organization, to improve. And failure to do so means our competition, they're going to beat us. And we've got to stay ahead. And so the willingness to change, the ability on your part as a key leader to create that compelling vision and communicate that clearly in an ongoing way such that employees feel they're part of. You've engaged them in the change effort. And oftentimes the communications where things get out of whack.
Yeah.
You've got a good plan, it's thought through, but nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
So you can't overemphasize communicate. And if you can do that and engage the people who are going to be impacted by the change, it's going to pay off in spades. But as a leader, you've got to be out front. You've got to lead by example. You've got to show that not only are you committed to it, you are going to effectively model the change that you're asking them to make. If you're not willing to do that, people are going to say, this is just a passing thing. I'll wait it out. He or she will get distracted. And if you're out front leading that and recognizing employees and teams when change works and they're making progress, you're going to be able to help overcome the resistance to change, which is going to be inevitable. And anything you can do to provide resources to the employees in the organization to see it's done. And because change is something that it's constant. You have to make sure that whatever your organizational practices are, you want to sustain that change by embedding that into your processes, be it your policies, procedures. It needs to be embedded so it just becomes, this is now how we do things.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never met anyone that says they're a poor communicator. Right. So, I've met lots of people say I'm a poor leader, poor manager. I don't like to do that. But never heard of anybody say I'm a poor communicator, but yet we fail to communicate completely sometimes. So I would just challenge everybody listening that if you believe that you have communicated well, the change cycles and everything, first of all, assume that you have it, right? And double down on it and ask for feedback as well. Ask your direct reports, the rest of your leadership team, if they feel that this is clear to their team, and tell them to be open and honest and transparent with you. Because if you can manage change across your human capital well, then you're leaps and bounds ahead of your competition. So.
Awesome. Well, you've been the perfect expert for us, Mike, during the month of August, because the shift spot is all about shifting, and shift and change kind of go interchangeably with one another. Today's event was hosted by the Shift Spot, and it's one of our examples of our expert coaching events. We have 144 different events, not just like this, but events focused around issue resolution for your company, events focused around executive coaching in a group setting. All of this is done confidential for CEOs and business owners in our company. You can find out more about our membership benefits online, but what we really do is we try to focus on the core areas where business owners need the biggest shift and they need the biggest change, which is leadership, people, human capital issues, sales and marketing, finances, process and systems, and mind, body, and soul. Because, one of the things CEOs don't do well is take very great care of themselves. So I know we have one more week with you, and we are going to be talking about developing a strong company culture and employee engagement. So if you want to join us for the last event, please sign up at thisshiftspot.com/win. And Mike, if people wanted to get a hold of you, what is the best way that they can reach you?
Probably the best way would be on LinkedIn. I'm Mike O'Neill. The name of my business is Bench Builders, bench-builders.com.
Awesome. Well, we so much appreciate having you here today.
Thanks,
My
Mike.
pleasure.
Thank you.